Coming up, the New York Football Giants and every team are preparing for the NFL draft, but when Brandon Aiyuk requests a trade, it sends ripples throughout the league that we have to break down. Could, should, would the Giants be involved? What about the top of the draft board and Ryan Dunleavy's perspective, plus player prospects, and also thinking about a key area of need for Big Blue? We dive in, coming up next. Yes, my friend. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and we're thinking about the things that could impact the New York Football Giants, certainly depending on where players end up. Andy, Brandon Aiyuk, the request we all knew was coming, trade demand has been submitted to the San Francisco 49ers.
Well, apparently sources in San Francisco say that it has happened. But of course, the way that these things go nowadays, nothing is ever guaranteed. And so, right after all this stuff comes out, Ryan Williams, who's Brandon Aiyuk's agent, comes out and says, you need better sources. So while he's not outright denying it, he's kind of saying, like, you don't know what you're talking about. But if he did not request a trade, wouldn't the agent have just said he has not requested a trade? Just being a little bit cryptic there doesn't really make too much sense to me. I think we're all operating under the assumption that Brandon Aiyuk is unhappy, wants the contract this offseason, and now wants out because San Francisco won't give it to him.
Yeah. Clarification. The player and organization met and they've agreed to seek a trade partner for him. He didn't request it, but they, came together, whatever. Yeah. I mean, this has been kind of building up for a long time, going back to the before last season as well. Like the speculation around when was the contract going to happen? Will it happen? How is Aiyuk going to feel about it? And obviously, if you're San Francisco, like you're trying to thread this needle, because whether or not you have the rookie contract right now at the QB spot, which they do, part of it is we conglomerate all of this talent around our QB spot to make us high-level competitive year over year, and they may just have to sacrifice with him. The fascinating part about this, though, is Ryan Dunleavy. So this kind of goes what in conjunction. Ryan Dunleavy, this news comes out, and he's also offering what has been for him a weeks-long perspective, going back multiple weeks, that he believes the Giants are keeping their powder dry for a very specific reason at the top of the draft, and that's what would preclude them from getting in on the Brandon Aiyuk sweepstakes if that trade market starts to develop. First, the Ryan Dunleavy piece, before we'll address whether or not if we would actually go into these waters for Aiyuk.
Yeah, first and foremost, Ryan Dunleavy, writer for the New York Post, has been someone that has had the breaking news and the scoops throughout the duration of his time. Very, very credible guy that is obviously connected to the Giants. So we'll talk. Do you want to talk about the Aiyuk piece of it first, or do you want to talk about what his belief is that they do during the draft?
Let's talk about his belief at the top of the draft here, because I think it informs the wide receiver room, and then we can get into whether or not we would do it, should do it. But I think that it's a fascinating reason to say I would not get into the Aiyuk trade, because in theory that means that Ryan Dunleavy, if not for the top of the draft and the way he believes the Giants are approaching it, maybe would be willing to put draft capital on the table to go get Brandon Aiyuk, to have a big contract on the books at the wide receiver position, which would seem to contradict itself, because if you believe that they want to go get the quarterback at the top of the draft, why would you be willing to, if not QB, go get a wide receiver for a team that you think needs the quarterback? There's a lot of things swirling around my brain here right now.
Yeah, well, in Ryan Dunleavy's brain, summarization, this is kind of just at a high level. What Ryan Dunleavy is saying is he believes that the New York Giants are going to trade up in the draft to select their quarterback. He believes it to be J.J. McCarthy. There's speculation on which quarterback it could be. But Ryan Dunleavy says he's been consistent. This is what he believes that they are going to do. And that will take draft capital that the Giants will have to give out to whoever the trade partner might be, whether it's the Washington Commanders, the Patriots, the Arizona Cardinals, whoever in that top five that's right in front of the Giants. They would have to use a high second-round pick, maybe a couple of second-round picks, maybe a future first-round pick to be able to move up depending on how high they want to go. And that to me is interesting, to be planting your flag in the ground, Adam, at this point in time, saying, I believe the Giants are going to spend additional draft capital to move up and get J.J. McCarthy, when there is speculation that he also might just be there at 6 as well.
Well, so that's the weird part about it, right? The trade up piece is interesting just because, okay, Williams and Jaden Daniels and Drake May, and that's the 1, 2, 3 some order. If you're trading up to go get him 2 or 3 spots, I mean, I can do the hard math, Andy. That's saying you're going to trade up to 4 or even 3, maybe with the Patriots to get, but then JJ McCarthy. Like, if you trade up 2 or 3 spots, that means that you're choosing JJ McCarthy over one of the other top quarterbacks, presumably Drake May or Jaden Daniels, knowing that Caleb Williams is all but going number 1, right? So that part of it is fascinating unto itself because it means that you have him higher up on your board than other people do, maybe, or at least that's the way it's fleshing itself out. And then to your point, yes, could he be available at 6? Certainly. Now you start to just talk about, well, why would you move up that far? Is Arizona speculating that, hey, we could take Marvin Harrison Jr., but we would be willing to listen to trade offers, right? The Chargers, well, we could take Joe Alt or a wide receiver, but we're willing to listen to trade offers. So we talked about this earlier in the offseason that if the Giants were in those waters, they would have to maybe potentially move up that far to secure the spot. So the weird part about this to me is we really like J.J. McCarthy and we want him. We prefer just to sit there and take him at 6, obviously. But then when you start to do the math of moving up, you have to go to the highest possible level of team that is not locked into taking a QB. And that seems to be the Patriots. Why? Because some other team is going to be willing to come and do that. My issue here would be, on this perspective is, and I realize I shouldn't say it's an issue. It would just be hard. If you believe in JJ, great. But that means you need to beat out potentially the Minnesota Vikings with 11 and 23 and a first-round pick the next year, right? Like, you're going to run into a bit of a problem here potentially about the amount of draft capital you'll have to give up to fend off one of those other teams. Not because you're not at 6, there's still value there, but I think there's going to be something enticing to a team like the Patriots saying 11, 23, a first-rounder next year versus 6 and what? And then if you're the Giants, are you willing to give up 6, 47 and a first round pick a year from now? That might end up being the price point that it takes to get there.
Yeah. I mean, the other piece of it too, Adam, and I know this may sound strange, but you mentioned Minnesota. Also think about the Las Vegas Raiders, for instance. They're another team that seems to be wanting to move up.
Mm-hmm.
And they may have their eyes on Jaden Daniels because of the connection with Antonio Pierce from Arizona State days. But Adam, like, regardless of what quarterback, it's going to cost more if there's more teams that are interested in moving up into that spot. So, like, whether it's Drake May, Jaden Daniels, but for the Giants to be able to move up to 3 to get their guy, they may be competing with someone else that wants their quarterback of the future, regardless of which one it is.
Well, and then not only that too, because I'll tie a bow on this part of it, and then we'll get into the Aiyuk, back to the Aiyuk side. Not only that, but think about it that, okay, so if the Giants, say any team is going to 3 to take quarterback X, right? And to your point, well, then that next quarterback, that 4th quarterback, and let's use the Giants in Ryan Dunleavy's theory here. The Giants move up to 3 to get J.J. McCarthy. Well, now Jaden Daniels is there. But Arizona, who is open to trading out, but now then they go, okay, is anyone really getting crazy here with bids and offers? Someone already made the big move. Does Minnesota want to come? Maybe they're maybe all still there. You know what? We're going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. We're fine. And then it gets to the Chargers and they go, you know what? We're just going to take Malik Neighbors. We're fine. All of a sudden, and then the Minnesota Vikings call the Patriots at 6 and say, well, we're not going to give you 11 and 23 in a first round, but we will give you 11 and X. You know what I mean? Like, there's this world where we'll end up talking about what did the Giants spend to move up? What quarterback did they get? And then who ended up at 6 again? Because if you're the Patriots and you make that first move down, I guarantee you that they'll be considering moving down again if they're talking about resetting their franchise. So that's the fascinating part of it on that side. Now, we had talked about not thinking that the quarterback is going to be the area that gets addressed here for the New York Football Giants. That can change over the next couple of weeks. Over on the Brandon Aiyuk side of it, though, too rich, too much, too low, not enough. Like, what are you willing to give up to get him? And how does it reflect on your belief in the QB room currently if you're not going and drafting your quarterback in the first round?
Well, Adam, this is a difficult one because, Brandon Aiyuk just turned 26 years old in March, right? He is on the final year of his 5th-year option as being drafted as a first-round draft pick. I think he's making $14 million this year. The reason why he wants out from San Francisco is because he does not want to play another snap before he gets guaranteed a big contract. And we saw how big these contracts are for even older guys like Mike Evans, but younger guys like Michael Pittman Jr. are getting $20 to $25 million plus, which is what Aiyuk is expected to get, $25 million plus on the open market. So when we talk about the financial piece of it for the Giants, it would be expensive. They would not agree to a trade with Brandon Aiyuk unless they were willing to extend him immediately or had the framework agreement already taken care of. So you're
Right.
talking about the Giants guaranteeing what, $75 million to Brandon Aiyuk, $80 million after just agreeing to that type of extension with Brian Burns. On the financial side, it's a tremendous amount of money that the Giants would spend, but that's kind of what you have to do when you swing and miss at certain positional groups, and you have a significant void that you have to fill. You have to go out in free agency and pay for it or trade or whatever it may be. So on the financial side, if it was just the finances and Brandon Aiyuk was a free agent this year,
Open
would you
market,
say
yeah.
immediately sign up for this deal?
In this offseason, predicated on what, and same thing with Brian Burns, right? If it's just on the open market, do you go give him a massive contract? Like, yeah, okay, I do, because I need to get another centerpiece into my defensive unit. Maybe it's the same thinking, hey, like, yeah, I want to have an established player that I know, especially inside of this system, can be all that versatility that I want. And I love Wan'Dale Robinson, and I think that Jalen Hyatt's going to come along, but I know Darius Slayton is, a good, not great player for me. You're still a long ways away in terms of having real value inside the wide receiver room. It's a massive commitment, but the trickle-down effect of how it affects your draft and the other areas of need that you'll address, and we'll talk about that here later. I can squint and see it, right? It's hard. It's hard to look at that amount of money and say, that's how much you're going to pay for it. But to your point, when you look inside the wide receiver room for the Giants, you go, well, we do need it. Like, it's not like nothing to worry about here. Even when I talk about how much I'm excited to see Wan'Dale Robinson in year 3, I still have my doubts. Like, I still have my concerns that what if he is just a 55, 60 catch guy? That's not a number one. And I'm not trying to make him the number one either, right? So you need to bring something in that makes everybody's life easier. If I followed Joe Shane's logic, I might do it. I don't know if objectively I would do it, given the way the Giants cap is and all that other stuff.
Yeah, that's the difficult part. I think in a vacuum, getting a wide receiver,
getting good players is good.
Yes, young good players, right?
Good players,
He's 26 years old. You expect him to continue to progress and be a top line wide receiver for at least the next 3 or 4 years, which is kind of what you would look at in the contract. But then all of a sudden, they're saying a late first round pick, early second round pick is going to be the draft capital that is associated to bringing in Brandon Aiyuk. And when you think about it, 47 might not even be the draft pick that gets it done for Brandon Aiyuk. So you're saying, I need 47 plus a 4th round pick next year or something else to be able to get him. So all of a sudden you're saying 25, it starts to become very similar to the Brian Burns situation. And do you want to allocate those resources knowing there are so many holes that still need to be fixed from guys that have left in free agency for the Giants?
Yeah, and then are you eating your tail a little bit because, we invest big money in certain positions, but that means that we turn around, we replenish with the draft. Well, the problem is we spent a lot of our draft picks to go trade for these guys. So to your point, open market, you want to spend the money, great. Add a pick into the mix, and all of a sudden it obviously gets a little more complicated. Having Leonard Williams go out the door to give you that extra second rounder for Burns was good. We don't have another second rounder to throw into the Brandon Aiyuk pot. So that being the case, interesting to see where he lands. Why do we talk about it? Because not only does it impact the Giants in terms of are they in or not, it also impacts, well, what if an NFC East team comes calling for him, right? What if the Dallas Cowboys decide they want to make a splash? What if Washington? What if it doesn't matter. And I'm not talking about who has the money, positions, or anything else. It's just what if one of those teams comes calling? And what if it's a team in and around the top 10 to 15 of the draft right now who's interested in wide receiver? Could all of a sudden Brian Thomas Jr. become a little bit more available as you move back in the first round? All these things matter as we push our way towards the draft. We are going to, coming up, get into a concerning area on the defensive side of the ball. The defense as a whole, which we'll discuss as we always let you know, today's episode being brought to you by Personam. Why that is because Personam is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms just can't do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. Are we always learning, Andy, on the defensive side of the ball in terms of having enough talent? Because when we think about this draft, I go back in and I do remember that Leonard Williams is not on this team anymore, that A'Shaun Robinson is not on this team anymore. We just mentioned Xavier McKinney is not on this team anymore. Whether or not Adoree Jackson was the perfect former number 1, new number 2 cornerback, not on this team anymore. That is 4 starter / high-level contributors for this team from a year ago. You brought in Brian Burns. That's electric. But this was care of Dan Duggan. He was like, hey, we all may be talking about how explosive and dynamic Brian Burns is going to help make the defensive front. They have holes on this defense that they need to address in a significant way going into this draft class.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talk about whether it's the quarterback or the wide receiver at 6, and then you look and you sit there and say, well, they at least brought in a running back. You hope that Daniel Jones is healthy. They brought in Drew Lock. They have at least tried to shore up certain areas on the offensive side of the ball in places that they may have had people leave or were injured previously. On the defensive side, if while they made a big swing, Joe Shea made a big home run swing, acquiring Brian Burns and then subsequently extending him for big money.
Yeah.
Adam, you mentioned it. At all the different levels of the defense, whether it's the defensive line, the cornerback position, or the safety position, the Giants had key players that have left that really were either saying, hey, we're hoping that one of our guys steps up that we've drafted or signed as a free agent over the last couple of years, or we still have things that we know we need to address in the draft. I could see a situation where more than half, almost 75% of the Giants draft capital in this upcoming draft is actually used on the defensive side of the ball to fill some of those holes that you mentioned before, especially on the defensive line, losing Leonard Williams and A'Shawn Robinson. You kind of forget because Dexter Lawrence is so good that like he's only one person and you really need other complementary pieces on that defensive front. We all hope that Jordan Riley can maybe take the next step. We saw flashes in the preseason and in camp that was encouraging, but he really didn't get that many snaps during the season. Clearly, the Giants need to address at least the defensive line at some point with some of this draft capital coming up.
Of course. Yeah. No matter which way you slice it. And it does feel like right now, barring a trade down, which has seemed to be less and less likely just based on the way people that cover the Giants extensively have discussed it, that the trade down is unlikely for Big Blue. If you do that, then it opens up at the top of the draft, taking maybe one of the top cornerbacks if you're in that 10 to 15 kind of range. And that could certainly change the dynamic of the draft. But by and large, as you say, whether it's quarterback, whether it's wide receiver, okay, now you're up at 47. And it's the part where, like, when you hear Trey Benson get mentioned, I go, yeah, that's awesome, man. And I can go look him and watch his highlights, look at the stats, and get excited about him. I get it. But then you're talking about now it's pick 70, and you're like, do we have a cornerback that we're going to bring in here? You're at pick 70, and you're thinking, do we want to go defensive tackle if best player available fits that position, safety position as well here? To your point, and we talk about Darian Beavers coming back from injury. We like Micah McFadden's second year. We obviously have Bobby Okereke. There's a lot of pieces there, so I don't want to sell it short that there's not talent. But it's just, if there's enough holes at enough spots in just the right order, all of a sudden we'll be looking at a defensive team that has a lot of talent, but always ends up missing on a key player or two, right? Well, we didn't have the second corner, so we're getting burned by the elite number 2 teams that have that top talent wide receiver. Or we get gashed in the run game when Dexter Lawrence has to come off the field. Bobby Okereke is excellent, but Jordan Riley doesn't take that step forward, and we feel like we're missing that little bit there, let alone talking about injuries, Azeez Ojulari, health, all those other things.
Yeah, you kind of feel like the acquisition of Jalen Mills gave them a little bit more flexibility in the safety room. Just because you have Jason Pinnock, who I think you and I both love and think, he had kind of a breakout season last year. 4th round pick Dane Belton is someone that we've talked about, quite a bit here. You have Javarius Owens. And so when you talk about Jalen Mills being the complementary piece, you're talking about 4 guys for 2 spots in the safety room. Obviously, you probably would want to bring at least 1 more or 2 more people in to camp, because the second someone gets injured, inevitably, which they do, you're talking about a very, very thin rotation there. But for me, at least, I feel like we have something there in the cornerback room specifically. I mean, we've pointed this out quite a bit before. It's why I talk about Kamari Lassiter in the second round as a potential fit for the Giants. Right now, starting on the opposite side in the cornerback room of Deontay Banks is Trey Hawkins. Now, Nick McLeod is someone that wants to put his name in the ring. They re-signed Darnay Holmes. But I think you and I both would agree that it feels like they definitely need to address the cornerback room at some point in this draft.
Oh, of course. Of course they do. And by the way, that's why I highlighted safety, because I think you still want to improve that area. But to your point, maybe it's good enough right now, and you're not going to go into those waters. I'll ask you, we can kind of wrap our episode walking through this scenario. One of the dream ones, and this is what just played out, guys. When you do these things in real time, you're only optimistic at best. But when I play out a mock sim where the Giants are there at 6 and Minnesota says, hey, we'll give you 11 and a first-round pick next year to come up, I say, yes. And my mind is, let's walk through the scenario where the Giants can take a cornerback. They can take Arnold. They can Quinyon Mitchell, obviously, out of Toledo. Those guys get talked about at a high level. But then when I trade back, Andy, Rome Odunze is still there. Now, what's a guy to do? You know what I mean? I thought I was going to be able to walk down a beautiful path where, okay, all the wide receivers are gone, the quarterbacks are gone, and along we go. But if the idea is that would be the potential here, where we're talking about the wide receivers being gone, the quarterbacks being gone, and a trade down, that is a very enticing way to go about this if you can get beyond the wide receiver room, because then you take, let's just say, Quinyon Mitchell. And now, yes, you have to turn back around and think about the wide receiver room and talent, but it's a deep class at that spot. When you come up at 47, how confident are you if it is, as you mentioned a Lassiter before, Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri, who I'm not that high on. I wouldn't take him at 47. So you start to play this game if you're the Giants. And whether or not you think, we've seen this a lot. We're walking through all these scenarios. You may think, set it and forget it, best wide receiver, whoever's available, take him and done. And we tend to agree. We love Rome Odunze. However, this is what Joe Schoen and the Giants are doing. Well, what if an offer comes in the door? We trade back, and all of a sudden we get a top-flight cornerback to pair with Deonte Banks? Great. Now our defense, maybe we don't even have to worry about defensive tackle or another spot there on the defense at all until the 4th or 5th round again. And everything we do after 2nd, 3rd, and even 107 is all about offense, right? Stockpiling. Maybe we do take Benson, et cetera, and on down the list. So that's the interesting equation that you don't have to squint hard to see playing out here for the Giants.
Listen, Adam, the Giants, at the end of the day, the Giants are a team that is projected to have 6.5 wins on the
Solid
season.
Number.
That goes to show there are tons of areas of need. It's not just like, okay, if the Giants get this in the first round, like set it and forget it, everything else is icing on the cake. The Giants have specific holes across their roster. We just highlighted the defensive line, the defensive front clearly needs to be addressed. The cornerback number 2 needs to be addressed. Safety needs to be addressed. We probably think they're going to grab an offensive lineman at some point. They definitely need a wide receiver. And a lot of people are saying they are going to address the quarterback position, whether it's in the first round or during this draft as well.
Right.
At some point, once you get past the 6th pick and you lock in whichever, game-changing franchise type player you get, you're kind of at the mercy of other people unless you spend draft capital to go up and get your guys. So to your point, is Kamari Lassiter still going to be there? Will Xavier Legette be there if you decide to forego the wide receiver at that position? These are the types of things that you don't really have control of. And because you have so many areas of need, you kind of just have to hope that, you sit back and you trust the evaluation that you've done in the rankings of these players. But yeah, I mean, they're not the San Francisco 49ers. They can't just go and say, we'll take the best player that falls to us. The Giants have very concerning areas of need that they have to address, and they have to hope that they get it right in terms of what the sequencing is of those players.
And by the way, man, you mentioned San Francisco, as we did at the top. What happens with Brandon Aiyuk? The position to be in as an organization to say, okay, give me your best offer for the pleasure of paying this man $25 to $30 million a year. And what does that get us? More draft capital, more young talent, more control talent, right? And that's a lot of what we're talking about here is like the Giants kind of chasing their tail a little bit. 6.5 win projection. We're going to do a whole episode talking about, can anything shift that narrative? Can we move beyond being a 6.5 win team? But living in that reality and then saying, and let's go trade away a draft pick to get Brian Burns, and let's trade away draft picks to go up and get a quarterback, and let's trade draft picks to go get a wide receiver. Listen, you can choose to go that route and have no assets within the draft to operate. But if you do that across the board at key positions, then guess what? The timeline does change. The expectation changes because now you're on the books with a lot of money. And I just wonder, chicken or the egg here? Is it the bad Daniel Jones contract that is informing the decisions that they're making? Or are they making decisions because they want to fix the bad Daniel Jones contract? It's very hard to figure out which way the Giants are 100% going here. That's the nature of leading up to the draft. We all believe in wide receiver. We all believe in positions of need. And we all believe that in less than 2 weeks, we'll know, because the draft will happen and that'll give us some of the answers all throughout the. I mentioned there 6.5 win total, man. I think there's a harsh reality about the upcoming season potentially for the New York Football Giants. We're going to talk about that over the course of this week. We're going to give you cornerback highlights here, some more prospects to watch for as well, other wide receivers, running back room, and then can we find a quarterback in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round that we believe in? We'll try to spotlight some of those players as work our way through. Get after us on YouTube at One Giant Podcast with your questions, your comments, players that you like. Someone mentioned the other Washington receiver in Polk, who we will talk about. So we'll get into all these guys and so much more over on X at AndyMac214, at Adam Arbrecht, and at One Giant Podcast. Until next time, though, still best times. As Andrew Mack was a want, need, and a demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.